everybody, Mike here with Delta Faucet. Today, I'm gonna walk you through how to install the Delta Trinsic bath faucet featuring Touch2O with Touchless Technology. As I mentioned, I'll be installing the Trinsic model, but these steps will work for a variety of Delta Touch2O with Touchless Technology bathroom faucets. Now, the install of this touch and touchless faucet is very similar to a normal faucet with only a few extra steps. Also, these are battery operated, so there's no need for an electrician. And at the end of the video, I'll give you a quick overview of how to use this technology. And remember, like with any technology, issues can arise. Now for troubleshooting tips, please refer to our separate video. If you have any questions about the drain installation process, we have a dedicated video that covers that in detail too. Okay, so let's collect the tools and supplies that we'll need to get started. You may need a couple of adjustable wrenches, a bucket, a towel for some light water cleanup, some silicone sealant, and of course, some safety glasses. All right, now that you have everything we'll need, let's jump in. Now the first step in this install is going to be dropping our faucet down into the hole in our countertop after we've removed it out of all of our packing materials. But before we do that, I do want to point out a couple things about the faucet itself, because I think it's helpful to kind of preload a few things as we drop this into place. The first is you'll notice that there's a temp sense indicator ring with an LED on it that's going to sit on the base of the faucet. Now you want to make sure that little LED light is lined up with the Delta logo on the front of the faucet, and you'll kind of feel that it actually will sit into place and kind of lock into place when it's in the right location here. Once that's in place, I'm going to hold it with my finger, and I also want to double check to make sure this little foam gasket is seated fully in the bottom of that LED indicator ring as well, making sure nothing's getting pinched or kinked in any way. All right, now that this all looks good up top, we're ready to start lowering this faucet into my countertop. Now when I do this, you'll see we have a bunch of tubes and a wire and a tag here. I just want to make sure everything's going in nice and smooth, nothing's getting kinked, and nothing's getting pinched. So as I do this, I'm going to start with my longest tubes first, my supply lines, and then slowly feed everything down into place. Make sure I get my temp sense indicator wire in there. And also you'll notice I have a tag here. I want to make sure that tag's not getting damaged in any way as I drop this into place, because it has important information like my model number and also the manufacturer date of my faucet, just in case I need to know those things in the future. All right, we'll slowly lower everything down into place here. And I want to generally line up the faucet where it's going to be in its final location here, and I think it's good just to double check one last time to make sure that the temp sense indicator ring is seated correctly in the bottom of my faucet body, and also that rubber gasket isn't getting pinched in any way. All right, everything's looking great. So at this point, I'm just gonna kind of gently let it go. And then our next step is gonna be moving underneath the faucet to start tightening it up. But also I do wanna point out that at this point, you'll notice I'm installing this faucet on a smooth and flat countertop surface. Now, if you were installing your faucet on an uneven surface, something like a very natural stone or even a tile, I would recommend adding a little bit of silicone underneath that bottom ring there, just to ensure a watertight seal between the faucet and the countertop itself. All right, let's move on to the next step. Here we are under our sink. Now the first thing you'll notice is I've cleaned out everything from my cabinet here, as well as removed my cabinet doors. Now a lot of times these cabinet doors do come off pretty easy, and I think it's nice to go ahead and have that extra space. However, it's not mandatory to do so. So to hold our faucet into place, we're gonna be tightening it down to the bottom of our countertop using this included mounting bracket. Now the mounting bracket itself has two sides to it. One side has this rubber finish to it that's gonna be facing up and contacting the bottom of our countertop. And the other side has this metal surface. We make sure that's facing down towards the bottom of my cabinet. Now this is gonna slide up over the shank of the faucet. You'll see there's a little hole in the middle here. The shank is that threaded metal rod you'll see coming down directly from the bottom of the faucet itself. Now to hold everything in place, once we've slid this over the shank, we're gonna be tightening everything down with this nut that came included with your faucet. Now the nut should have come preloaded in the bottom of this little black wrench that also came with your faucet. However, if it fell out during shipping, that's totally fine. I think it's a great idea, however, to go ahead and preload that in the bottom of the wrench, as it makes this next step that much easier. All right, with all that said, let's head up to the bottom of our faucet behind your sink here and start tightening everything into place. Now that we have our faucet secured to our countertop, we can move on to connecting our supply lines. So to do this, you see I've got a towel for some light water cleanup in case I need it, and a couple of adjustable wrenches, and also my two check valves. Now the steps I'm gonna walk you through are gonna be exactly the same for the hot and the cold side. So I'm gonna show you how to do the hot side first, and then you'll repeat the exact same steps for the cold side as well. Now the first thing is to determine which side is the hot side. Now if you'll notice, my two supply lines here are the longest tubes, and if I pull back the nuts, you'll see Delta has color coordinated each one of my lines. So the red side is going to be my hot, and the blue side is going to be my cold. So again, since I'm doing the hot side, I'm going to start with the red tipped line. Now before I do that, the first thing I'm going to do is install the check valve onto my supply stop. Now the check valve, you see, comes in two parts here. It's got an insert and then the check valve itself. So the first step is going to be taking my insert and placing it into the top of my supply stop, like so. Once that looks like it's in a good position, I'm going to take my check valve, place it over the top of the insert, and then begin threading it onto the top of my supply stop. Now this should thread easily. I want to make sure we're not cross-threading it or forcing it in any way. Now once I get that hand tightened, I do want to ensure that this is going to be a nice watertight seal, so I'm going to use one of my adjustable wrenches and just give it a little bit of an extra turn here to make sure that I'm getting a nice tight seal. Now one point of note is I want to make sure I'm not over-tightening this, just enough until it feels snug. All right, so that's perfect. Now that we have our check valve installed, we can move on to connecting our supply line to the top of the check valve. So again, I'm going to use my hot side here, that's the red tip. I'm going to take it to the top of my check valve. Now you'll see that my supply line is a little bit too long to easily fit to the top of the check valve itself. So I have two options. The first is I can actually loop the supply line before bringing it down to the check valve. However, if I do make a full circle, I want to make sure the diameter of that circle isn't less than 8 inches, because anything less than that could cause this line to kink, which could cause a flow issue down the road. Now the other option, the one I'm going to use, is making more of a helix shape out of my supply line. That's kind of giving it like a little bit of a twist, making it look almost like a DNA strand or something, and then bringing that supply line down to the top of my check valve. Once that's in place, just like before, I'm going to take the nut and begin hand threading it onto the top of my check valve. Once I get that hand tightened, I want to go ahead and snug this connection up as well. Now this time I'm going to be using two adjustable wrenches. The bottom wrench I'm going to place on the check valve to hold it in place as I tighten that top nut. And then use my second wrench. Give this taut, give it a little bit of a turn here. Again, making sure I'm not over tightening it. I just want it to do it until it feels snug, which should make sure that I have a nice watertight connection. All right, all my connections in my check valve look great for the hot supply side. So now I'm going to repeat the same exact steps for the cold side, get all that connected, and then come back here for the next step. Now that we have our supply lines connected, we can move on to flushing our lines. And basically what this means is running some water through our system to make sure we clear any debris that may have been caught in there during the installation process. So to do this, I have my towel and a bucket. I'm going to place my bucket underneath my countertop here because that's where the water's going to be flowing. Next, I want to make sure that the faucet on top of the counter is in the full on and full mix position. That means halfway between hot and cold. And also, I'm going to be holding my spout tube, directing the water that's going to come out in a second into the bucket. So once everything looks good, let's go ahead and turn on the hot and the cold supply stops to the full on position and let the water start flowing. Now I'm going to let those run for say about like 20 to 30 seconds and then go ahead and shut both of them back off again. So once you're ready, let's go ahead and flush those lines. All right, now that that's done flushing the lines, I've removed my bucket. I'm cleaned up any residual splashing with my towel here. And now we're going to be ready to move on to installing our solenoid. So this is your solenoid. It's the unit that looks like this and has this integrated blue clip at the top of it here. The first step to installing it is going to be inserting the spout tube, that's the one that just had the water come out of it, into the top of the solenoid. So go ahead and place them together and then push them together until they're fully seated. All right, once they're fully seated, you can use the integrated blue clip and snap it into place like so. It should snap easily. Next, we're going to connect the remaining tube, that's the gray one with the other integrated blue clip here, to the bottom of the solenoid. Now you'll notice that to do this, I'm going to kind of have to hold the solenoid at a little bit of an angle to line it up with the other tube. That's totally fine. The important thing here is making sure that we're keeping an eye on both tubes, making sure that neither one is becoming kinked or crimped in any way. So I'm going to hold the solenoid at a little bit of an angle here. Take my second tube, again, put it on the bottom and then push them together until it's seated fully, and then clip that blue clip into place. All right, now that we have the solenoid fully connected, everything's looking great. So we can move on to installing our sense wire. Now the sense wire is this little white one that has the metal circle on the end of it. This is going to install over the shank of the faucet. That's the one we used to tighten up to the bottom of our countertop in an earlier step. So when you're ready, let's go ahead back underneath our sink to the bottom of our faucet, install our sense wire.
To install the sense wire, I'm going to take it and place it over the end of the shank, and then use my second nut, which you can see I've preloaded into my black wrench. Again, threading that nut onto the bottom of my shank. Once I get it started, I can hold that up there with one hand and use my free hand to spin that all the way up to the bottom of the mounting bracket. And I want to make sure that sense wire is facing directly away from the sink. And then I'll use my wrench to tighten it down into place.
Now that we've made that connection, we can move on to some of the final steps in this installation. The first is going to be installing our temp sense wire. That's the indicator wire that goes to the LED. It's going to go into the side of our solenoid. So let me spin it here a little bit so you can see it. It's going to go right in that top hole like that. Now that we have that connection made, we can move on to installing our battery pack. Now the battery pack itself, you'll see has indicators on the outside for the direction of the batteries to be installed in, and then also does have a top and a bottom. The bottom has these little feet so it can sit in the bottom of your cabinet like so. Now the batteries you can use either C batteries or AA batteries. It's going to take 6 either way. If you are installing the AA batteries, we just want to make sure we have this included insert already fitted into the battery case itself, which you can see will make it sure that those AA's fit correctly. Now for my install here, I'm using the AA's, so I'm going to start installing the batteries. Again, keeping an eye on the outside here, making sure I'm getting the negative and positive terminals in the correct orientation. All right, now that we have our batteries installed, we can go ahead and clip the top onto the battery pack. Now the top itself is directional. It has a top and a bottom. The top is going to be the side that has that wire coming out of it, but you can also tell, because if you look at the top of the battery pack top itself, you can see it has a little positive and negative that's going to correspond with the positive and negative terminals on your batteries. So just keep that in mind when you fit this into place. And then you're going to push it down, making sure those side clips fully seat on both sides. All right, now the battery pack's about ready to go, but there's a few things to keep in mind. First is we want to make sure the battery pack is sitting in the bottom of our cabinet and sitting on its feet like so. Next, we're going to place it towards the back of our cabinet, but we want to make sure that it has about at least 1 inch of clearance from any sidewalls or back walls that could cause some interference. It's also a great idea to check your battery wire at this point, making sure the wire that goes from the battery pack to your solenoid is free and clear from touching or coming in close proximity with anything metal. This includes things like your supply stop. And finally, just keep that in mind as you're loading everything back underneath your sink here, making sure nothing's getting pushed up tight against it or being stacked on top of the battery pack itself. All right, so that about wraps everything up. The last step, and one that I think is extremely important, is checking for leaks. So I think at this point, go ahead and turn on both your hot and your cold supply stop to let water start running through the system. And I'm going to check a few specific points to make sure I don't see any evidence of leaks that I need to correct. I'm going to check both the bottom and the top of the check valves on both the hot and the cold supply stops. And I'm also going to check both of those blue clip connections on the solenoid itself, just making sure everything looks good and I don't see anything dripping. And also while you're under here, I think it's a good idea to just keep an eye on the rest of your plumbing, your P-trap and your drain, making sure you don't see anything that needs to be tightened up in there as well. Once everything looks good under here, we can go ahead and close everything up and move back up top to complete this install. Now that we have your faucet fully installed, I wanted to take a quick moment to run through how to operate your Touch2O with Touchless Technology faucet. Now, first and foremost, whether or not using the touch or the touchless technology, we want to make sure that the handle to the faucet is in the on position to make sure it's going to dispense water. Now for the touch functionality, it's going to be just like the name implies. We're just going to touch the faucet on to dispense water and then touch it again to stop the flow of water. And you can touch anywhere on the faucet itself. Now the touchless technology works slightly differently. It's going to sense the proximity of my hand to the faucet, say within about 4 inches, and dispense water while it keeps registering that my hand's within the faucet range. So I'm going to bring my hand close to the faucet and it'll start to dispense water. I can also tell it's in touchless mode because the temp sense light is slowly pulsing. Now when I remove my hand, the faucet will continue dispensing water for a few more seconds and then shut off automatically. And remember, with the touchless technology, it won't register my hand if I'm just passing by because it wants to make sure that I actually want water dispensed. Finally, remember this is a faucet after all, and I can always operate it as normal just by controlling the handle like you normally would. That about wraps things up. We hope the install went well for you, but if you have any additional questions about the functionality of your Touch2O with Touchless Technology faucet, be sure to check out the separate troubleshooting video we have for that. And remember, you can always reach out to the Delta Faucet customer service team. They're more than happy to help.